Good morning, and of course, good evening to all of you joining us from around the world. Welcome to today's GloCoach live session on our Global Leadership Conversation series, where we are exploring how data, empathy, and AI are shaping the future of leadership. My name is Andre Giesiger. I'm GM of GloCoach here in Europe and co-founder of the company. Very excited for you all to be here today because as we approach the end of 2025, many leaders are reflecting on how to finish the year strong, balancing results, uncertainty, and of course, the human side of leadership. So that's exactly what today's session is about. You know, how empathy, supported by AI, can become a measurable driver of performance and connection. We are thrilled to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Mandy Zimmerman, PhD and PCC. She is a reflective leadership coach and advisory coach here with us at GloCoach. Now, before I talk about Mandy and what we're doing today, a few things on housekeeping and GloCoach first. So this session is around 45 minutes long, and we have saved time at the end to address your questions. Many of you have submitted questions in advance. Thank you very much. For those who haven't, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the program. So, without further ado, a little bit about our speaker today. And that's, of course, Dr. Mandy Zimmerman. We're going to, of course, call her Mandy. And Mandy is an interesting person because she has been working all over the place, I would say, right? It's really interesting on what she brings to the table. She has leadership experience across 4 continents, and she is known for helping leaders to turn their pressure into clarity, presence, and measurable impact. She's a true advocate for bringing empathy back into leadership, and she's doing that so with depth, data, and of course, real-world results. And that's really what this is all about. Now, you see Mandy's resume here on the page. And with that, I'm, of course, delighted to hand this over to Mandy, who will walk us through a case study and explain a little bit how empathy and AI work together and how that can transform leadership in action.
Thank you so much, Andre, for the introduction, and also welcome everyone else. Thank you so much for your interest in empathy in leadership, because I think it's a very, very important topic. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. As Andre said, I have experiences in leadership myself. I'm actually a chemist by background and have a PhD in process engineering, totally different topic from coaching. However, why I was deciding to become a leadership coach was the experiences that I had in leadership myself, in organizations, connected and related to the lack of empathy in organizations. And they are the reasons of what I will be talking today, why we're even talking about empathy in the first place. Because what we see today is actually a gap in what people want to see and in what people really see in organizations, right? We live in an era where people value soft skills so much more. And on the next slide, I have some data that I can present to you as well. Especially when we talk about younger generations, which is Gen Z, millennials, and they are already more than 50% in the workforce today, and they are going to grow. So younger generations will become more in the future as older generations go into retirement. And these younger generations have been asked, and they value soft skills, empathy, emotional intelligence so much more than ever, they say, when they have been asked, for example, by Deloitte. Also, these younger generations value the meaning and the purpose at work. That means they want to come to work, they want to have a harmony of work and life together. They want to integrate it. They want to see purpose and meaning in what they're doing. And empathy plays actually a very important role in this, as leaders need to understand what their employees really value, what their needs are, what engages them, so that they are engaged and say, this is a company I want to work for. Because what we're also seeing is that the engagement in employees is going to decrease when empathy is not there in leadership. And we see very high turnover in organizations that don't show empathy. As these generations today have so much more opportunities, we're talking about hybrid working, we're talking about remote working, opportunities in other countries. So there's so many more opportunities for these young leaders and employees in nowadays than before. No one is working for 40 years anymore in one company. So you want to keep your biggest talents. Also has been studies have been showing that employee or leaders that are seen as empathetic by their teams are also at the same time considered as the higher performers by their own leadership. Why is that? Because 76% of employees say, when I have an empathetic leader, I'm willing to give more. I'm more engaged. So they're willing to put in the extra effort for their leaders. They're actually being more loyal to their leaders and helping their leaders to perform and to get their projects done better. So then they are seen as better performers amongst their peers in leadership by their leadership. And also Ernst & Young has been showing that 87% of employees say, when I have an empathetic leader, I think this drives innovation in our organization. You would say, like, how does empathy drive innovation? It is these leaders that are understanding what people need, again, that understanding how they have to develop their teams, that are understanding what talents do I have in the organization, that are building trust. And with trust, the psychological safety in organizations is increasing. And with this, people dare to say more, they dare to try more, they are daring to fail as well, because failure now is allowed. And they are bringing their ideas that otherwise they might not have said, because they don't want to say it, because they are not engaged, or because they really don't dare, because they don't have psychological safety. So you see how important empathy is in leadership in today's workplace. And as a summary for you again, what are the costs of not having this empathy in organizations? As I said already, you have high turnover, people are burning out. And I've been seeing this myself in the organization where I'm from. Actually, I'm one of these as well. And I'm one of these that left the organization because of lack of empathy. The disengagement is decreasing when you don't have organization or cultures of empathy in your organization. And Gallup did a study that shows that, unfortunately, today, worldwide, there are only 21 to 23% of employees really engaged at work. That shows you already, and we have seen these numbers before. Everyone says it's so important, yet we still have very low engagement because we don't really see this empathy in the workplace. I have been seeing projects failing. Maybe a very quick story of myself. When I was working across 4 continents and we were having global projects, to the personalities that you have in your organizations, you already have cultures as well. So on top of this, and empathy helps you a lot with how you communicate, how you're being understood. And due to this poor communication that we were having in the organizations, we were having more conflicts, we were having mistrust. And we were having a lot of misunderstandings, and I saw really $100 million project fail worldwide because of this poor communication, this poor collaboration, which was due to lack of empathy in the higher leadership in the organization. So if you feel right now that it's like a little bit tight in your chest, you might want to listen and why and how you can actually improve this. You're missing innovation in your organization. You have weaker decision making because leaders that have more empathy include in their strategic thinking, in their decision making, also the needs of the employees of the organization, and can make better decisions and engage their people more. Everyone knows how expensive turnover costs are. When you have a normal talent, it's starting by 50% of the annual salary. If you have a more senior talent, if you have a more specialist talent, it can go up to 200, 250, even I heard numbers of 400% of annual salary that it costs you when you have to replace your talent. And it has been shown in studies as well that more than 40% of these turnovers could be prevented if we would have better management interventions. So there is awareness. More than 90% of CEOs actually say, yes, we know that empathy is tied to financial performance of the organization, yet we see there is very low engagement still worldwide. We see that there is still low integration. And why do we have this? Actually, companies are trying. HR organizations, leaders are trying to improve the empathy in the organization. Maybe if you want to show the next slide, Andre. They are running workshops. And can you teach empathy? Can you learn empathy? Yes, you can. However, if you do an off-the-shelf workshop, and if you do it one time, it's not really hanging with your people. So if you do a one-off workshop and you're not offering ongoing support, you're not offering support on how to implement this now, how do I use this for my own situation? This workshop is going to be forgotten very, very quickly. People are too busy. They're going back to their desks. They're going back to their emails. They're going back to their normal work and their busy work days, and they are forgetting to implement because they also don't know how to implement. They're not reminded to implement. Yeah, they don't have this ongoing support. I have been working with one organization. It was a very fast-growing software company, and I had the question of some team members that were doing one-on-one coaching with me. Am I really allowed to take that time to implement what I'm learning here? Because I don't have any time, and I don't dare to ask my leader to take off some time, not taking off, but to take some time of my day and implementing what I'm learning here, because I have to go back and I have to go to my busy work environment. And if the organization itself is not role modeling this and is not saying this is, we want this culture, we want to live this culture, we are showing to you this culture, it's not going to happen. And if you're taking some generic assessments, some generic surveys, thank you, I'm talking a lot. Without taking action and without taking the action that is really working for you, it's also not going to work. Many organizations, unfortunately, have like a fixed mindset. They send their middle management to workshops and say, can you just do something here? We are busy, we don't have time. This is something I don't like to see very much because it starts at the top. So if you don't role model it for your own people, how should your people build an empathetic culture in your organization? And many organizations also focus on short-term pressure. We have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this now, rather than a long-term culture that they do not yet understand. Maybe that if you would have this long-term culture implemented, you don't have this pressure anymore because you are more productive, your people are more engaged, as I showed in the beginning, and now you can change the slide. What is then working actually? Make empathy in the first place, make it a must-have skill for your leaders. if you hire new leaders, if you promote leaders in your organization, please check that they have empathetic or emotional intelligence, that they have human-centered skills. And if they don't have them, help them to develop them. It is possible to develop this and embed empathy in general into your culture. Of course, role model it and measure it. And we are going to see how to measure it afterwards. Let me introduce a case study to you that I've been doing here at GloCoach with a client. Of course, when clients are coming, we are doing assessments with the whole organization or many people in the organization. I'm going to introduce one specific client to you. And what was the situation? So this company, this client, was going through a major reorganization. And the individual talent that I was working with was on a director level, and he was very much involved in this reorganization in commercial operations. He was a very great talent. He was considered actually for a VP position. However, he was not really bringing all the skills that the company wanted to see in a VP level. So this was a company that was fortunately very much aware of how important emotional intelligence and empathy was. Strong execution, strong problem-solving skills is something that they were saying he brought, but he had a pretty weak followership, especially in his peers. So what are we doing with these clients? We have something which is called an OBA by Lance. It's an observation-based assessment. Observation-based assessment by Lance, which is our artificial intelligence assistant, I want to call him or it. And talents are undergoing a 360 assessment. Now, you might know 360 assessments are usually very complex. If you want to do them right, you have to interview all the stakeholders that have a say in the behavior of the client. And this is a very broad, a very excessive process. And with artificial intelligence, we are actually able to collect this feedback from every stakeholder at the same time, like actually in no time for any person involved other than the person that has to give some feedback. So they're getting questions, and Andre will explain how it works exactly a little bit later. And then the artificial intelligence is actually able to give you a report, a summarized report. It's anonymized. No one can track back on who was giving this answer. This is very famous in 360s, that people want to find out who was saying that about me. And it's not about this. It's not important who was saying what. It is really important on how you're perceived by your surrounding. If or if not, you feel the same about yourself, but this is a perception that, how people in the organization see you and where is the gap to where you are and where you want to be. So you will get a report about how others see you. You will also get, if you are the client or if you are the talent, you will have a self-assessment as well. And you can see gaps here. And after that, you will have a debriefing session with a consultant from GloCoach and your stakeholders. And you will check where is the gap, where do you want to be, what is your goals, and what can we do about it, and in order to get you where we want to have you, we as the stakeholders, where we want to have you. What did we do in case of this client? So this client, as I said before, had high problem-solving skills, and now I have to check here in my cheat sheet. High technical, functional, and functional expertise, and high analytical thinking, and high courage. The courage, as you can imagine, is very interesting for execution skills, but it also can be, if it's too direct and blunt, with a lack of emotional intelligence, it can hurt quite some people around you, and that was exactly the case in this situation. So the report showed that there was a growth area in emotional intelligence. There was an area in how this person was communicating, in how this person was building followership. And there was a side effect that I don't want to talk too much about. It was delegation, which has to do with empathy, but it's more about the analytical thinking and not wanting to let go. But it has to do with trust and empathy as well, how you delegate. So these were the results that the report showed to us. And Then in the talk, in the discussion, in the debrief with the consultant, we were choosing 2 specific elements that we wanted to work on, that we saw and that the stakeholders saw. If that is improved, then most certainly this person can go to the next level in their position, to the VP position. So we wanted to work on emotional intelligence and on building followership. How did we do this? Well, we were choosing coaching in this case, and in this report, or in this AI assisted report, you will also get some suggestions on what exactly the goals can look like, and then you are going to phrase. I'm very sorry, like sometimes my English is just suddenly gone. You're going to get support on how to phrase your goals. We're going to set SMART goals. You can choose the goals that the AI is suggesting to you, or you can just tailor those goals to you, depending on your situation, depending on what you learned in the discussion about yourself, about how you're being perceived and what your goal really is. So we were choosing that we want to enhance the active listening skills of this talent and building followerships by improving their relationships with their peers. I have no idea how much I have to talk about the coaching itself. We were working a lot, and I think here is where the empathy and the human aspect of our work is coming in as well. Right, because you get this report, and now you can have a lot of suggestions from AI, but what really matters is your personal situation and how it lands on you and how it works for you. So in this specific case, we found that active listening for this client was actually very, very difficult, because there were some emotional triggers, some frustration coming up when he had to pause and listen to someone where he didn't agree. So we were, when you say I can teach you active listening, but what was actually the case was really how to quieten these triggers and what to do with these triggers, and working on his own emotions. So as you see, working on emotions with someone whose emotional intelligence is not too high is not so easy, because that's exactly why they don't want to go there. Emotions can feel scary, a little bit difficult, and this is where you can go into in a very confidential and safe space, like in one-on-one coaching, for example. So the results at the end of these sessions, we had, like, in this case, we had long sessions, we had 18 sessions. We got feedback from the stakeholders and from the clients, from the talent himself, that his active listening skills actually improved by 100%. So now he was really able to listen to people, to pause, to have his triggers under control, to quietening his judge, because that was one of the triggers that were coming up, and really listening to people. And with this, he was actually really strengthening his relationships. And with relationships, of course, his followership. So in the end, I was really, really happy to hear. It was not immediately after the sessions, but a few months after, he was calling me and saying, I got the promotion. So now he's at a VP level in this organization. He is with this organization. As I said, this organization values very much empathy, and I'm very happy to hear this. And here I have a small feedback from this client about our coaching, what I'm very, very proud of. All right. And I think, Andre, if you would like to take over and share how it's working actually, and show us a little bit what it looks like.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much for walking us through the case study and your approach to empathy, and how this actually adds value to the company in a measurable way. So, dear audience, one thing maybe I should do is I wanted to share with you a little bit about how we get to the results that you just heard. And of course, it's by great coaches like Mandy, who can help and accelerate the talent into a higher level of performance. Now, this cannot be left to coincidence or luck by just having the right coach at the right time, but it requires a framework in place that allows us as a provider to scale this service to clients around the globe. So What we firmly believe in at GloCoach is that we have a human centricity, yet AI enablement. Like we just heard from Mandy, this is about human-to-human interaction for a while to come, yet at least. We'll still deal with humans when we work together, and therefore being able to interact effectively with other humans is of the essence. And of course, the work with a coach like Mandy will help you to get there. Now, what we have done in order to scale this and ensure that we can help many different people around the globe is we've designed a tool called OBA by Lance, so observation-based assessment by our AI agent, Lance. And Lance, by the way, is not male or female. In some language, it's female, in some male, but it stands for Life AI Nurtured Consulting Experience. So it's an acronym. But anyways, it's a tool that allows us in a very scalable fashion to do observation-based assessments that are normalized. And I will share you an example. We will share actually John's example, which is Mandy's case study here. And so I will share with you what a report like that looks like. Before I do that, though, I will share with you the GloCoach Leadership Model, because that's the foundation of what we do at GloCoach. If we are going to deliver a result like the one you just heard of, it requires a few things. It requires, first of all, buy-in from the different stakeholders, including the talent, but also the line manager and HR and others, in that we can do something about it. And I'll get to that when we look at the report. The second thing you need is alignment. What do I mean by alignment? Well, what is it that we want to achieve? And Mandy referred to goal settings that we did, and what the report does, it suggests areas of development. And this is a baseline. It's AI generated baseline that, of course, you can adjust and then ensure that the line manager and the talent together are aligned on what will be done and who's doing what by when. And the third step, of course, is very crucial, and that's the accountability. Because once you've set up the plan, you got to execute and you got to be accountable for doing what you said you're going to do as a talent, as somebody on that development journey with the coach, but certainly also the other stakeholders like the line manager, giving feedback, supporting the talent on his or her journey to that new level. And so that's part, of course, of the advisory coaching platform that we spoke about. I will afterwards also share with you what that looks from a company perspective, because you work with John and other talents, but what does that look like at scale? And we will share with you the platform as well. So now, as I've mentioned all this, let's take a quick look at the leadership model before I go into John's report. The GloCoach Leadership Model is not something we invented per se. We've developed it based on best practices, best of breed, with clients that we work with. These are global companies that you all have heard of. And we looked at the ones that really perform well, and we created this 32 competency model in 3 pillars: developing yourself, developing your relationships, and thirdly, developing your business. The idea is not that a company, a client should take over this leadership model, but we're using this and not the client's leadership model for a few reasons. For one, when you do assessments with AI, you want us to be very consistent. You want us to calibrate data, which means to ensure that when we talk about a certain behavior, that's always categorized the same way, because if we don't do that, we can't match the coach. So that's an issue. So you want that. But thirdly, of course, you want to be able to base your goals on that and then, of course, measure progress. So those are certainly good reasons. What we can do also, of course, with that is it enables us to do internal and external benchmarking. So you might be interested in understanding how your team stacks up against, let's say, the industry, the market. And thirdly, you can see if your leadership model is missing. And I can tell you, we've seen this with clients time and again, that maybe a global leadership model is missing out on aspects that are relevant for certain cultures. And we know this because we got started in Asia. We work in Asia, Middle East, Europe, and Latin America, as well as North America. and Africa. And there are significant differences when you look at talents, requirements, and needs. And therefore, a model that might be generated in Europe, let's say, or North America, might miss out on aspects that are important in other markets. So those are some of the reasons, but don't fret. There's an opportunity, of course, to link our model with yours. We call that talent sync, so that we can generate these reports also in the context of your own leadership model. Okay, now having said all that, what I will be doing, I will be sharing quickly the report of John. And that report is something that I think might be quite interesting to see here. And just give me a second, and we'll be right here at the report of John, the talent that Mandy was supporting. So this is an executive summary, and of course it's been sanitized. So this is obviously Avery Smart. That's a made-up company. We are not showing any real data per se, but here you see a little bit of what the report would look like. And Mandy, I invite you to comment on this as well, because of course this is the report that you're familiar with. But before you do, maybe quickly of the assessment overview. So you saw the leadership model, and we have developing self, the relationships, and your business. And what we did after interviewing, I believe it was 5 people. I have to go back and check how many people exactly it was. It was 5 sponsored interviews plus a talent, so 6 interviews. But looking at the sponsor interviews, we identified a total of 9 different strengths that were mentioned. And there were also 9 growth competencies mentioned in those interviews. And as you can see, they were centered around particular skills. The strengths were around developing self and others. And when you look at the growth competencies, it was really primarily centered around developing self. And let's just take a quick look on how people perceived it. This is again based on our leadership model. And it was really centered around influencing skills and courage, and then a few other skills that were very strong. And as Mandy pointed out, emotional intelligence was mentioned 3 times, which means 3 out of the 5 mentioned that as a key growth competency or a blind spot behavior, based on a blind spot behavior. Plus, 2 mentioned communicating with credibility, 2 mentioned building followership, and they're all related, as Mandy pointed out in the case study. Plus, of course, delegation, and delegation can relate very closely to the 3 topics above, or the 3 competencies above. Would you like to add something right here in the overview, Mandy?
I think it's very clear. So it's very clearly seen here that emotional intelligence was the #1 growth factor that everyone said. And that also was very important to the company, to the organization, that he was improving, especially this one, to be ready for his new position.
Exactly. And so what I'm going to sum through here, actually what the report also outlined is the strengths, and with very particular examples that people mentioned. And we have here also, of course, some of the examples that were mentioned that people, like you pointed out, obviously, before Mandy, that people he focused too much on executing tasks himself and didn't delegate properly. And also that there were some issues of lack of transparency as they perceived it, which is partially of that. And of course, last but not least, the emotional intelligence, that he could benefit from adapting his communication and working style to cater to the different audience needs, making him a more approachable leader. And then we have some very particular quotes that come out of these interviews. Okay, now what I also wanted to share beyond that is there's of course a recommendation, and this was based also on a structure that Mandy referred to, which we call the develop the ability to table. And again, these are recommendations, and clearly the recommendations were around emotional intelligence and building followerships, and then particular recommendations. We've taken out the ratings here, but what happens is actually when we do the development briefing session with the talent, his line manager, and HR, we would get ratings. These days, it's actually generated by our system as a suggestion, where you can actually then adjust these ratings. And again, to Mandy's point, this is a baseline. This is a suggestion of what you can work on, and you don't have to. It's really important as part of the buy-in and alignment process that you understand that what is being said here is not about absolute truth, but it's about perception, your own perception, self-perception, and third-party perception, and understand if there's a gap or not. And if there is a gap as identified by the report, do you accept that? Yes or no? And if you have that gap, do you want to do something about it? Yes or no? And that's the fundamental part of buying, because if the talents don't accept that, you will not see any change happening, period. So it starts with the buy-in. There is a perceived gap. Again, not they are right, I'm wrong, or vice versa, but there's a perceived gap. What can I do about it? And yes, I'm keen to close that gap. So that's really what this is about. And these suggestions here are about the not only buy-in, but then the alignment of what do we want to do and how we're going to do it and who's going to do what. That's the baseline. And then we have something called an IGP. I don't want to go into that too much right now, but the IGP is about understanding about what can be done in an individual growth plan on very particular action steps to be taken and how you're going to measure success. Okay, Mandy, did I miss out anything on the particular report?
You didn't miss. I just wanted to make one addition. Like, we took actually one full session in really figuring out what exactly should the goal be. What does it look like? What does it look like afterwards, after we change what is expected? And always with the talents buy-in, so that he really was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And he didn't feel forced to do anything. So we were very much aligned all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. Well, then what I'd like to go, I would like to switch directly to the particular platform that I mentioned earlier. So now we've spoken about the GloCoach Leadership Model, how we categorize and actually calibrate the inputs that we're getting from these sponsors, these 360 team members. And the way we calibrate them, of course, is by categorizing them. And the questions Lance is asking, by the way, as a side note, is not just saying, hey, what is John's strength? But it says, what is the strength? Give me an example, impact business team. What is a blind spot behavior? What is a potential growth competency? Give me an example, impact business team, ideal behavior. And you guessed it, examples, impact business team. And with that insight that we're getting, the examples, the impact a certain behavior had on the team, on the business, Lance can categorize it in that leadership framework. And then based on this feedback from all the different stakeholders, the sponsors and the talent, can generate these suggestions. And because there's a strong consistency, a calibration of input, and I want to be clear, this is not about objectivity. Whenever people are involved, we're dealing with subjective information. And we're not going to change subjective information into objective statements, but what we're doing is calibrating subjective statements, perception people have, based on evidence they're providing as impact on business and team. And with that, we get a consistency. That's the calibration part. And the calibration part of an individual assessment using our tool not only benefits in setting goals or matching a coach, setting goals and measuring progress, but it allows us also to do this, looking at the group of talents and now do internal benchmarking. And so this is what I'm going to share with you briefly before we give it back to Mandy. So imagine you're at Very Smart, the company which you saw. Again, this is a fictitious company, and this is a sandbox. So all of the data you're seeing here is sanitized. Now imagine John works with a team of 25 talents. They all have been assessed. We've conducted 100 interviews. 75 different stakeholders have given feedback. So 360 team members, which we call sponsors. And you can, of course, do the analysis here by selecting different ways of looking at groups of talents. We have an overview here. So at this point, the head of HR or the chief strategy officer, in some cases, it depends on what the role is doing, who is focusing on this, but is looking at this overall and is looking, okay, of these talents, what are the perceived strengths, growth competencies, and cited top competencies, no matter if it's a strength or a blind spot, and is it what I expect to see? So during those 100 interviews, we identified an overall 139 strength behaviors and 92 growth behaviors. Part that would be emotional intelligence, as mentioned in the case of John. You can then deep dive and look at the key strengths across the 32 competencies and understand what was mentioned most frequently as part of the strengths. What that means is, like John, this is important for John in his role, and he does it well. Okay, that would be one count. And in this case, 14 times collaborating across boundaries was mentioned. 13 times we're looking at driving results and communicating credibility, etc. On the other end, you would see things like project executive presence and leading with humility as 0 each. So that means 100 interviews, and that was never mentioned. Again, the categorization is based on the content you deliver, not actually a particular category you might have mentioned by word. We have the same thing, of course, for the growth competencies and the total. And what a leader should look at this point is, okay, given the talent that we're having here, am I or did I expect to see these to be the most important competencies that people are either good at or not good at? Because like if this was, let's say, a very senior team, you probably would think, why is demonstrating forward thinking? Maybe if sales team, why is focus on customers or showing business agility not further up? They're all here in the middle third. And why are things like communicating with credibility top, which is of course important, but might not be the most important focal area for somebody who is a very senior leader. So this can tell you if the executive management team's expectation for this particular subgroup and their sponsors, their 360 team members, is in alignment or if there's a gap. We have now here also a couple of heat maps, and we generated a few examples for you. The first heat map is just looking at the strengths. And what this means, if you are up here like Alejandro, Kai, or Kwame, you're in the top left. What this means, if you're looking at talent map, we call this a T map. If you're looking at the T map on only the top 10 strengths, let me just quickly go back and show you. These are just the top 10 most frequently mentioned competencies that were strengths, identify the strengths. If you only look at them, then you know that Alejandro, Kai, and Kwame, their strengths, all of them come from those 10, and none of their blind spots or none of their areas of development come from those 10. And of course, the opposite would be true if you're sitting down here. Now, why is this relevant? Because now you can group and saying, assuming that these competencies are actually really important to me, who in my team has demonstrated these particular capabilities, and who are some of the potential, let's say, coaching candidates or development candidates, such as Nia Williams, who has most of them, but maybe can, if she's boosting 1 or 2, she will actually be able to be also in the top left corner. I'm just going to go into one more a map here, and that's a customized map. What happens is you can run this and saying, I want to create my own map, and I want to select particular competencies that are important to me. And so what we did actually, we selected the 10 competencies that are often associated with emotional intelligence. And this was selected by Mandy, actually. And we selected this and said, okay, with this group of sample reports, if we select communicates with credibility, shows curiosity, etc., who in this group will show up? And so I've obviously really pre-run it. And as you can see here, if you look at these particular competencies, and by the way, they are listed here on the bottom left, you see there are very few people, and there's only one person that shows up in the upper third, and that's a gentleman by the name of Sven Eriksson. Again, made up name, but you can then click on him or his name, and then a summary of the assessment report will pop up, outlining the type of competencies that were mentioned and the frequency of a particular strength. And of course, the same thing for the growth competencies. In this case, you also have then a summary here of the notes, and the blue is actually quotes coming straight from the interviews done by Lance. Okay, I know this is a lot of information. I want to just show two more features here for for the audience here. We have something called predictive analytics. So what you can now do is ask questions that I have prepared for you here is, who are the leaders with the strongest empathy, both in engaging with internal and external stakeholders? And Lance answered that these three names are the top, and why Lance selected them as the top three empathetic leaders. And of course, Sven Eriksson wasn't there. So I asked, well, why is Sven not there? Is he a leader that has empathy? And he does, according to Lance. And he gave reasons why he didn't show up at top. And then here I gave them a question on what actually drove the other three to be chosen. And he gave the competencies that were selected to actually come up with the answer. What I'm trying to say is here, now with 25 people, you might know them all, where we have organizations that have hundreds, if not thousands of people that are assessing, and there's not a single leader within the organization that knows all of them. This is meant as a strategic advisor on your side to understand what some of the potential challenges are when you're looking at overall development plans, or if you have a strategy to be implemented on how you actually can select some potential candidates or understand what some overall challenges might be for a subgroup within your talent community. And then, of course, you can generate these reports and send them out depending on what you need to do. Okay, I think this is enough about the report, and I'm very happy to address any questions you might have. I want to quickly go back because I see we're a little bit behind time, and I want to again share the presentation here and continue with the presentation by Mandy. And we have here this here that I just shared. And I obviously discussed the OBA report ahead of you. Now, before I go further, I think we can maybe quickly summarize the key points, and I would like to hand it over to Mandy before we go into the Q&A session.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you for this deep dive into what it then really looks like. I think very, very quickly, so that we have time for questions. Key takeaways, as it's written here, we can measure it. Leadership behaviors are measurable. Behaviors are measurable. You have to choose what do you want to measure, and empathy is actually one of the most important leadership skills that we find in 2025. And here at GloCoach, we can combine AI with coaching and help you to make your leadership growth measurable and scalable and predictable, practicable, whateverable we can find. And with that, yes, I thank you very much for your interest, and I'm waiting for your question.
Well, thank you so much, Mandy. We have a few questions that were sent in to us, and I would like to ask them. It was really about some of the biggest challenges, and it was mentioned by one participant that organizations need to pivot rapidly to stay competitive, yet employees crave predictability and purpose. Effective leaders must provide clarity in ambiguity. How do you do that?
Well, empathy helps, like in many, many things. Many I hear this very often, like, oh, all these emotions, and we don't have space for this, we don't have time for this. We need to focus on the important things. And the feelings of the employees are important. They're the most important because that's your most important assets. So if you are empathetic enough and you're able to understand what people are going through in these times, you are better able to support them and predict or being transparent, being direct and directive doesn't exclude empathy. So you can do both. You can be very strong in your leadership and still be empathetic, or especially because you are empathetic, it's easier to help people through these rough times. Because in the end, it's people are scared of change, of all this unpredictability, of this ambiguity, and you have to help them. And you help them better if you understand them and if you and empathy is part of feeling what they're going through and not judging it.
So what I'm hearing is the more complex our world gets, the more technology driven it becomes really crucial to understand what moments need to have that human factor and really understand the emotional connection required to actually make this work for all the parties involved. Is this
Yes,
a
yes,
fair
absolutely.
summary?
That's fair, especially when
Okay.
you only focus on technology, on growth,
Yeah.
on numbers, on all this fast pace, and you're forgetting about the people. You won't see, and then suddenly you will say, like, why is it not working? Because you forgot about the people. So you really have to understand where is people the most important part here still in this organization, and then you have to look there. For all the other things, you have IT and technology and technicians.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting because you're a PhD in obviously with chemistry and engineering background. I'm myself also a quant guy, econometrics background. And I think a lot of people realize coming from a technology background or a science background that actually human factor is the decisive factor as you're really looking at what organizations are successful versus the ones that are not. And I would like to quickly bring up a question by Christina. Thank you so much for posting it. The question here is, what is your stance on empathy versus compassion in a company culture? I talked to many people, also leaders, who pointed out we need to be more compassionate, not empathy. And then she has definitions of it. I
Yeah,
will hold
I
the
have been
definitions.
reading this. Thank you so much, Christina, for this. I agree and disagree at the same time. So empathy is part of, if you want to be compassionate, you need a certain level of empathy. Otherwise, it's difficult for you to be compassionate and to understand how people are suffering and recognizing it. So empathy helps you recognizing where people are not doing well. And then the part of, yes, empathy, people that are highly empathetic by nature tend to suffer with them or like feel what people feel and are not able to distinguish between is it mine or is it theirs. We're talking about managing your empathy, and that is emotional intelligence. So when you're able to manage that well, then you are compassionate. If you learn empathy because it's not one of your natural strengths, you won't have this emotional empathy anyway. You will have more cognitive empathy, and you won't suffer with them when you have only cognitive empathy. So yes, we do need empathy, and I understand we need compassion, and it's always also a matter of how you define it. There's so many definitions of empathy, but empathy is a part of just really everything that has to do with humans.
Very nice. Thank you so much. I have a few more questions here, and I am very much aware that we are 6 minutes to the end. But let me ask here, another big challenge is how can I better understand what truly motivates each team member so I can connect with them on a human level while aligning their goals with our collective?
Active listening. Listen, it's really hard to listen sometimes because you have your own things going on. You might judge about what people say. We all do this. I'm doing this, and my number one strength is actually empathy. But I do, of course, judge. Try to switch that off, to put it aside, and don't judge about what you hear, because it's important for them. If people mention it, if people talking about it, it's very important to them. It's something that they are dealing with. If you listen to them, you will hear what you need to know, And also you already give them, you open the room for trust. So if people feel understood and listened to and not judged, and somehow that you really genuinely try to understand and help, they trust you more. And with more trust, you have better relationships, and it's an upward spiral.
Wonderful. Another question here is, as AI and automation reshape the workplace, how can leaders balance the digital efficiency with the need for authentic human connection and empathy?
Yeah, I think part of this you answered before already, or saying
Yeah.
AI should support the work. It should support workflows and processes. It should not replace anything. And the good thing is, as a leader, if you have all the support of AI and technology, you can focus on the human skills and you can focus on empathy and on connecting with people and seeing what they need and yeah, what they need.
Okay, wonderful. I'm just looking. So I guess there was one question here just that came in right now. What is the difference between empathy and emotionality or emotion?
Yeah. So empathy is really that you are able to understand what someone else is going through right now. If you have a natural emotional empathy, you also are able to feel it. Emotionality, I guess it's meant like that you show emotions. Can be many things, can be humility, can be vulnerability, but can also be not controlling your emotions. So
Okay.
in empathy, you might very well be able to control your emotions. Empathy is part of emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence, if you manage that well, you're able to control your emotions and you are not reacting emotional.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. There's one last question here. What uses of AI are coaches exploring? Obviously, we covered, I think, that in the session here, but if you want to add something beyond, obviously, these tools like Lance, maybe something else that you want to add,
Yeah,
Mandy?
so of course, in the assessments, it helps very well in writing reports from the information you give. It might also be helpful to find tools that you want to use. Like, coaches have only so much in their brain and forget about things. So it might help coaches to identify the best tool that they want to use with the client. However, the use and the work with the client should still be human. And every coach I know wants to keep this human because you need this emotional connection in order to bring someone forward.
Absolutely. With this, I would like to briefly summarize a few key points, if you don't mind, and then we'll get to the last, the very conclusion of this interesting talk. Thank you. So what I'm hearing is coaching still as obviously human centric. We spoke about that, yet AI enabled, and quite frankly, our world is moving towards a more AI driven environment. So we need to embrace it as humans. It's very important, but we also need to understand what is it that AI does and does better, and what is it that we can focus on and ensure that we keep a competitive edge as an employee, as a leader in an organization. And I think strongly encourage, of course, people to reflect on this because like things like categorization of skills, it's something that AI is replacing people to do. But like you pointed out, the complexity of building trust, reading between the lines, reading somebody's emotions, that will remain, hopefully, for some time to come, a job for people like yourself, Mandy. And of course, leaders having coaching abilities and working with their teams in the company, internal, external stakeholders. With that, I would like to say a very, very big thank you to Mandy for this interesting talk. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us here at GloCoach Live. And I would like to tell everybody, please, to stay connected. We have here a QR code. If you want to follow us, it's quite easy. We always produce new and interesting content. We have lots of different people that have interesting insights to share. So please do follow us on LinkedIn. And with that, I would say, again, a big thank you to our speaker today, Mandy Zimmerman.
Thank
And
you.
we look forward, obviously, to any questions you might have. Do reach out to us. Until then, I would say our next GloCoach Live session will be announced soon. So again, as I said, feel free to subscribe to GloCoach Insights for updates. Until then, thank you so much for being part of this global conversation today. And let's continue to build leadership that connects data, empathy, and impact. Have a wonderful day, evening, and see you soon.